demo gods will take away time. But I did take screenshots from demos, so that should be useful. So I'm sponsored to come here today by Codeship, the makers of Galera Cluster, but I also happen to want to spend more time at home in Malaysia, so I do other stuff from home. And I've done MariaDB MySQL for a long time. I'm going to use the terms fairly interchangeably. I mean, how many of you here use MySQL? How many here use MariaDB? Okay, Percona server? Surprisingly, a lot less. I guess if you've used MariaDB recently, at least for the last couple of years, you all know that it's really a fork of MySQL, and there are lots of different stuff. MariaDB Server 10.4 is still a release candidate. It should have been sort of released now, but I guess it'll be released in a couple of weeks. So we're going to focus on the current latest releases, 8, 10.3, as well as a bit of 10.4 and Percona Server for MySQL 8. It turns out breaches are really, really bad. Ashley Madison was a fairly bad breach. So if you were cheating on your partner, it got leaked, and people got divorced. Divorce can be expensive. Philippine voter data also got leaked, and this one's quite bad actually, because it turns out even your fingerprint data was leaked. So you can actually find this on the dark web. The Panama Papers, some of you may think this is a good thing, but lots of rich people who were hiding from taxes also got into trouble. Under Armour, I use this app personally, MyFitnessPal. Nice app to log how much food I eat. 150 million accounts affected by anybody use MyFitnessPal. They would have forced you to change a password eventually. SingHealth, Singapore Health, over 1.5 million patient records leaked. Health records are really, really serious. You shouldn't leak them for whatever reason. In fact, this is one of the main reasons why Singapore actually says that going forward, all government services will go offline. They're not going to be online any longer. Not connected to the public internet anyway. Equifax, I don't know if you do credit reports here in Germany much, but in most places, credit reports are quite important. They tell you like if you can get a credit card, better limits, loans. Equifax leaked. And stuff that even affected me personally, British Airways, Cathay Pacific, credit cards, loyalty info, info about like what kind of quirks you have when you fly. All leaked, available on the dark web for you. Turns out there are many reasons why it matters in terms of security nowadays, because you got to have PCI compliance. For a fairly long time, credit card data needed to be PCI compliant. HIPAA compliance is quite important for American healthcare. Sarbanes-Oxley has been around for a long time. Lots of companies that are public have to follow. GDPR, I'm sure all of you are familiar with this one. Every website you go to has a little pop-up now thanks to it. And maybe you even find websites that don't work anymore in Europe because they've just chosen not to comply with the GDPR by blocking you. Many American newspaper websites just don't work here. Like if you go to LA Times, it just says no. Many data protection acts as well as privacy acts in individual jurisdictions cause you to need to secure your databases. UK has their own, Korea has their own, Japan has their own. In fact, this is one of the main reasons why you also see cloud companies like Amazon start building data centers inside of, say, Korea, Japan, because some of this data just can't leave the jurisdictions. And there are lots of requirements around continuous monitoring, data protection via encryption, privilege management, retention via backups, user activity, as well as auditing your data via, say, user activity auditing. So to secure your databases, largely you want to assess, basically locate risks and vulnerabilities, prevent, so use, cryptography, encryption, have good user access and controls. If anything goes wrong, you want to be able to detect. So audits are important, regular monitoring is important, as well as alerts. And you also want to recover from security breach if you happen to get one. You want uninterrupted services naturally. You want to also have forensic logs and so forth. So I suspect today, MySQL 8, how many use MySQL 8 or Percona Server 8? Nobody likes to upgrade? 5.7? Okay, it's 5.6, 5.5. Okay. What about MariaDB Server 10.3? Anybody use that? 10.2? Anybody still using 5.5 from RHEL 7? CentOS 7? No. Okay. So we've gone leaps and bounds, and I think 8.0 is something you should totally consider looking at because it's got lots of improvements around authentication, authorization, encryption, auditing, even to some extent firewalls. Historically, MySQL kind of sucked. Defaults are extremely poor. No password for the super user account. In fact, setting up MariaDB today, there's still no password for the super user account. If you enter passwords into your shell, like if you type MySQL-u username-p password, it's now saved in your bash history, your MySQL history. If also, got to make sure if you're like doing compiles, you're not running MySQL as root. Now, lots of ways for you to get hosed. If I can read your data directory, valid MySQL, if I can run strings on it, I can definitely look at it, password information. If I can start and stop the MySQLD process, I can definitely reset passwords. And if I can read my.cnf, I can also reset passwords if need be. So signs of extremely poor security. Old passwords, if you happen to use old passwords, people still require this. Thankfully, MySQL has disabled this. It's not an option anymore. MariaDB still has this. You don't want to use it. It's not the default anyway. MariaDB's default is MySQL native password. Users without passwords. This you can totally set. This is something you should totally not do. Anonymous users, not good. Granting all privileges to users, also not good. The root user without a password, which you can get away with still in MariaDB. Disabling SELinux or AppArmor today is extremely silly, or even IP tables for that matter. There is no IPFW. There's no reason to disable any of this because MySQL MariaDB comes with AppArmor and SELinux rules. So that you can run in enforcing mode without issue. This is true even if you are loading up like Percona HDB cluster, Galera Cluster, etc. You don't have to disable any of this. Does anybody run in disabled mode? You do. Why? For fun? On your laptop, maybe. But yeah, you really don't want to disable this stuff because we worked so hard to make all these contexts available that it doesn't make any sense for you to disable it. So, trust authentication is something that you could totally use, but maybe not always a good thing for you to use, because anyone that connects to the server is basically authorized to access the database with whatever database username they specify. So if you follow trust-based authentication, you could just type MySQL without -u username, and it'll authenticate against the user via the socket. Of course, other restrictions may still apply, like if you restrict via grants, but this really should only be used if you have adequate OS level protection on connections to the server, because it may be convenient for a local machine, so say on a laptop, but it's probably not great for a multi-user machine or something that you're going to keep in public. And it turns out that MariaDB 10.4, which, as I said, will be released as GA soon, actually turns this on by default. It's always been on by default in Debian, for example, if you use the Debian packages for quite a few years. And in fact, the first part of the documentation actually tells you now how to disable the plugin, because if you're running in a multi-user mode, this is probably something you definitely do want to do, is disable the plugin. You don't want to create Unix users for all your MySQL users, most likely. Now, MySQL 8 and now even 5.7 actually has backported this. Allows you to use caching SHA-2 passwords, so it's got excellent performance compared to SHA-256 password, and it basically caches it after you have the initial auth, and this is now the default as opposed to using MySQL native password. This is one of the reasons maybe why people maybe find a little problem migrating from say 5.7 to 8.0. It's also one of the things that will prevent you from easily migrating from, say, MySQL 8.0 to MariaDB 10.3 or 10.4. Caching SHA-2 password only works with MySQL. MariaDB Server still defaults to MySQL native password, but has a secure variant called ed25519, which is based on the elliptical curve DSA. MariaDB does not support this, so moving between the two, not going to work. However, moving from MariaDB MySQL native password to MySQL 8 will work. Now, when it comes to MySQL, you may also think about connectors. If you use the MySQL connectors you get from dev.mysql.com, they're now tied to a version number. So every 8.0.16 version, for example, everything gets bumped up. Now, some people don't want to use those connectors for maybe licensing reasons, and they choose to use the MariaDB connectors. So the MariaDB connector C supports the ability to connect to a server which uses caching SHA-2 password, but however, the ODBC and the Java connectors do not. And these are, of course, the reason around licensing is because MariaDB's connectors are LGPL, whereas the MySQL connectors are GPL with a FOSS exception. So you can't embed it for embedded apps. Plenty of ways to have password attacks, weak passwords, reusing the old passwords, brute forces, and so forth. SSL. How many run replication today with MySQL or MariaDB? How many have SSL turned on? No. Okay, so that would have been the practical had we had a bit more time in setting up stuff. It turns out everything goes around in plain text. It's wonderful. Passwords, insert statements, update statements, all plain text. Now, running this in a data center you trust, maybe not so bad. Running this in the cloud, kind of bad. Lots of people tend to think there's an overhead argument. It turns out it's actually relatively negligible. MySQL 8 actually turns on SSL-based connections by default. SSL-based connections does not mean replication has got SSL. It's just the connection has got SSL on it. I highly recommend turning it on. So again, people say performance is an issue. This is from Daniel Van Eden. He's compared against using YASL and OpenSSL as well as without SSL, and it turns out that connection times are really not all that bad. You don't really lose much performance by having SSL turned on always. So if there's maybe one takeaway you have, and from all of this today, is you should turn on SSL. In fact, MySQL makes it easy for you now via having SSL set up. So again, upgrading to something new can be good. This is true for MySQL 5.7. It's true for MySQL 8. It is setting up on MariaDB is not as easier because you still have to actually fire up the OpenSSL command. Lots of people also worry about data theft. You can encrypt the entire volume via something like LUX, or you could just use MariaDB Server or MySQL at rest encryption. Now, lots of, so if you have Percona Server, XRDB cluster, or MariaDB Server, Galera Cluster, one comes with encryption for Gcache and one doesn't. So the MariaDB variant now actually has Gcache encryption, so it can be a fully encrypted cluster, whereas the PXE variant and even the one that you get from Codership is actually not encrypted. The Galera cache is not encrypted. So this is also little niggling issues. Now, you can do select add global SQL mode, and you'll actually see what kind of SQL mode you're running in, and it turns out it's getting stricter and stricter as MySQL progresses. MySQL has also increased its security availability as it's progressed from 3.23 right up until even 8, in where you have roles today, and in 3.23 we're just getting grants. The ability for you to do so much in maybe the last 10 years is actually amazing. Now, if you have scripts that you use the MySQL.user table for, like you manipulate it in some way, shape, or form, it is worth noting that the MySQL user table has changed in 8.0. In fact, it is also different from what you get in MariaDB Server. So MariaDB Server is more likely to work with your old scripts, but if you're migrating to a new variant of MySQL, it's time to take a look at those scripts again. Now, again, we've had so many key features outside of the server in the MySQL ecosystem as well, and actually maybe arguably the first biggest security solution came from McAfee. It was an external contribution in the Audit plugin, but the Audit plugins, now you have so many Audit plugin variants that you don't actually need to use the McAfee Audit plugin any longer. Like today, it doesn't have to be on your choice. And so many improvements from 5.5, giving you things like pluggable authentication, audit capabilities, 5.6 with more encrypted credentials, 5.7 where you have a lot more secure by default with encryption available, 8.0 with roles, LDAP authentication with Active Directory, MariaDB, also no slouch here, kept on pushing from the 10.0 series with things like roles, user stats, which is a lightweight way of finding out what's going on with your server users, as opposed to using performance schema. Encryption, of course. In fact, it was the first to get encryption, followed by MySQL. Having things like the utility user in Percona server, great if you happen to be running, say, OpenStack, and you need to be able to do stuff as like a admin user without having access to the schema, and so forth. So root user with no password, very, very bad. So MySQL 5.7 onwards made it strict, so you get expired random password, you gotta change it, you grab a log, you change it, excellent. Now 8.0 also ensures you have a good secure base. Again, anonymous users also removed. Passwords keep on getting changed. So, will 5.5 or MariaDB, basically, you just saw passwords, no plugin. 5.6 basically starts specifying a plugin, so you'll notice it says MySQL native password as an option with the authentication string. 5.7 also tells you it's using MySQL native password, and the authentication string tells you what's available. And you'll notice that now I'm not actually selecting the password field. So I did select user password plugin auth string, but again, it's gone in 5.7. 5.7 onwards removes that, and also it gives you the ability to see things like password lifetime, when it was last changed, and so forth. And 8.0 makes even more changes by giving you the option to actually switch over to something like caching SHA-2 password, which is now the default, and also makes use of authentication strings. Again, you can now set a minimum password policy, for example, and you could then validate it against to see against what kind of password you have. So maybe you enter something with just 6 characters. It's not great. It'll tell you it's low. But if you enter with a full stop, some kind of punctuation mark and a number, it improves. And again, validate password strength is something that you can totally see via show global variables. This only works with MySQL. It does not actually work with MariaDB. So again, simple differences across both. The MySQL password is not some form of encryption. It's actually just basically a checksum using the SHA-1 function. So the MySQL manual contrarily will tell you that encryption performed by password is one-way, not reversible. That was not necessarily true, actually. MySQL passwords actually do not use a salt, so generated password on one MySQL server using MySQL native password will match another one created on another server, which is why this is removed in MySQL 8. So you can't do select password as password any longer. This still works in MariaDB, though you really should move away from it, since MySQL deprecated it as well. So again, remove test databases, set passwords for root, MySQL secure installation. Run this after you set up because it gets even better. Even with 8, it actually allows you to turn on validate password plugin and so forth. It gets better with every release, in my opinion. Removing anonymous users. The moment you have the ability to have an anonymous user, you could actually decide to just be malicious and fill up the disk if you wanted to, just by inserting random values. So some of you are still on 5.6, and you'll note that password expiry appeared in 5.6. The password validation plugin, which I just showed you, appeared. MySQL config editor there, but you probably don't want to use it. And also gave you the ability to have a random root password upon installation in your home directory as a .mysql secret. And password expiry is actually very useful. So this is an example of using it. So I've created a user demo identified by a password. I've altered the user, tried to connect, and then it actually tells me that I need to actually reset the password to a current value. You can totally run all this yourself also. 5.7, totally improved password expiry. So you can actually have automatic password expiration and a default password lifetime as well. So you could say passwords expire after 90 days if you want. You can also require it to be changed every 90 days if you want, or longer. And you can also lock and unlock an account. So you don't have to remove the user and the privileges associated with said user. You could just lock the account if someone leaves. 8 has also got great improvements there. You can actually require the new passwords not to use old ones. So lots of people, every few moments they decide to change. Like if you type OSDC, OSDC1, OSDC2, you can actually make rules to say that that's not allowed. The password history actually exists now, so you can do this globally or on a per user basis. You can also require to enter the old password and then enter a new password. This is not available before, so that you make doubly sure. And password retry rules have been around actually since later releases of 5.7 as well. Now, why do I put this in the 8.0 slide? Because it turns out when MySQL makes a release, even you're getting actually feature enhancements even in minor releases. So 5.7.21 could have new features from 20. This is not necessarily how most people like to release software, but if you follow the 8.0 train, you'll notice the 8.0.13 has got way more features than 8.0.12. It's not just bug fixes, it's actually new features. So read those release notes carefully. MariaDB Server has a validation plugin. It's fairly rudimentary. It's got a simple password check, so it can basically allow you to do ABCD 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hash, and that's obviously not good. So you should definitely try chain loading it with the cracklib password check. So it uses the cracklib library and helps you make sure that people don't give crappy passwords. I don't know how many of you use Debian, but if you do, now when you install MySQL 8, you'll see this wonderful warning message. It is there to tell you that moving to caching SHA-2 password is recommended, but there's no way to go back. And this also means it's not good for you to migrate to, say, MariaDB. So if you're going to migrate to MariaDB from 8.0 using caching SHA-2 password, all your users are going to have to recreate their passwords. There's no migration path. So I guess this is where really the fork has met the road. Now you got to take two choices. I mean, even before you'd have all these choices around features, but now this is pretty clear. So MySQL, of course, has the ability now not only to have connections that are SSL for client connections as well as admin connections, it also has the ability to have SSL for replication. So definitely run SSL, because if you can actually look at port 3306 traffic to see clear text SQL statements. So this is an example. Use nrep on ETH1. And you can actually see the unencrypted stuff. If I type select unencrypted on the host, it'll actually show up very nicely for anyone to snoop on. 5.7 on the other hand, I actually tried a select encrypted, and it actually does not show you anything that a human can read anyway. Maybe there's some magic way to break SSL. I just don't know how to. And you actually have to now force SSL equals 0 to actually make an unencrypted connection. So you have to go out of your way to make sure that you're not using SSL. And I'm glad to say 8.0 makes this much more interesting. So you've got a lot more options. You also need to set up the cert and the key. And actually an 8.0 server by default can run in FIPS mode. This all does work on MariaDB 2, except you got to set it up manually. Again, you can show SSL version as well as SSL cipher. These versions, they also change as servers get released or as people find vulnerabilities and so forth. 5.7 onwards includes this wonderful tool called MySQL SSL RSA Setup. Highly recommend you use it. Solves you solves your problem in less than a minute. OpenSSL, not hard to use, but requires more manual commands to get SSL working. This is more for you to read later. So, again, an example of a much stronger SHA-256 password that is available. But now I want to move on to authentication. PAM authentication is fairly common. MariaDB was probably the first to come up with a plugin, followed by, well, actually MySQL was the first to come up with a plugin, but they made you pay for it, so people don't like to use it maybe. So MariaDB came up with an open source version, as well as Percona also with an open source version. Configuring PAM is relatively easy. You can just, if you follow these exact commands, which you should obviously not do because I'm actually just basically saying go ahead and have the shadow user there. You can actually install PAM fairly quickly for a demo. Now, if you're installing the PAM plugin, there are, of course, two different ways to do this. Percona server and MariaDB have different ways of installing it. But the good news is the PAM plugin work from both Percona or MariaDB actually work with MySQL. So you don't have to change servers either. But you'll actually notice auth-PAM show up as well. So here's a quick demo, again, of PAM. I've created a user, external identified with auth-PAM. If I try to log in, it says it's not available. But if I add the user and create a password for said user, and then I try to log in, it actually tells me that I've logged in as external at localhost. So, and of course, the plugin is auth-PAM, not MySQL native password or caching SHA-2 password. MariaDB also comes with auth plugins, add 25519 being key. MariaDB also has GSS API auth, which is synonymous with Kerberos, but SSPI, it also works with Active Directory for what it's worth, so you can actually use that. Now, this particular plugin does not work on MySQL or Percona server, it only works on MariaDB. So if you happen to have a Kerberos installed, MariaDB might be great for you. Also has named pipes on Windows. I'm sure nobody here runs Windows anyway, so we'll just ignore that one. And the Unix socket by default, which allows you to log in as a Unix user. Again, I suggest if you have a multi-user system, you turn that one off. Example of added 25519 at work. Again, fairly simple, except, look, I've done the select add 25591 password as password, and I've created said user. Unix socket auth. You don't have to set this up, but if you actually did, this is an example of how one would do that. So many auditing plugins, but really the only ones that you should care about today are the Percona audit plugin and the MariaDB audit plugin, because the MySQL one costs money. There are obviously old and new formats where old and new actually spit out XML, but you also have the ability to have the all new JSON as well as CSV, which I also have quick examples of here. Now, you'll notice that if you look at this audit log and you look at this one, it's actually different, because it turns out that the audit plugin from Percona is more compatible with the MySQL variant, so you can use tools like MySQL Audit Grep, but the audit plugin from MariaDB is not quite similar. So MariaDB initially has extensions, so it's got user filtering available, but user filtering is also now available inside the Percona plugin for MySQL without extending the Audit API. But the Audit plugin is really good because it can log server activity, so who connects to the server, what queries they run, what tables were touched, and so forth. And highly recommend you make sure you use them. The Percona one's also got a bit more performance tuning available to it in the way that it writes those audit logs to disk. Okay, we're racing through. And secure storage, so you want to totally encrypt your data at rest. This is important for all kinds of compliance. With MariaDB, you could encrypt either a table space or a table, whereas with MySQL, you encrypt the whole table space. I highly recommend you also choose to encrypt a whole table space, not just a table. Overheads fairly low, again, typically less than a percent. If you run sysbench, maybe 3%. It's very well documented. It's also very easy to get set up. So getting set up, I recommend this thing called the preset. It's available in your my.cnf.d as an encryption preset. The only good key server you could use is the Amazon key management server that's available. This is maybe not ideal for you. MySQL binlog, of course, is no way to decrypt the encrypted binary log. So this can be a problem if you encounter replication issues. But the Gcache, as I mentioned earlier, is encrypted in MariaDB Server when you use MariaDB Galera Cluster. And if you want to use encryption, you can't use extra backup anymore with MariaDB. You have to use Maria Backup, which can actually encrypt and decrypt backups as well. Maria Backup is a fork of extra backup. So if you, and it works with like 10.2, 10.3, 10.4. MySQL introduced encryption in 5.7.11 as well. It initially basically did not work with the redo, undo binary logs, but it totally does work with 8.0. So 8.0 can actually run a fairly encrypted service. However, the external key management is only via Key Vault, kind of expensive. So the alternative might be the Percona server Vault. So Percona actually has a Vault plugin, which actually does work with MySQL. Vault is open source, ideal for many people to potentially use. So I think if you want to stick to encryption, you try the Vault plugin or the Amazon KMS plugin. We don't do column encryption in MySQL today. Now, if you're running replication or a Galera cluster, either PXE or MariaDB Galera cluster, remember that IP tables rules should always apply. You want to encrypt your cluster traffic, so generate keys, enable encryption, as well as for the SSD traffic. And you want to turn on table space encryption. This one totally works fully if you use, again, MariaDB. SQL standard roles. A role is basically a user account with login disabled. It's a memory-based hash of flattened privileges that exists for each active role. And it's you can have an optional host as well. And a user can have several roles. This is SQL standard, came to MariaDB first, is implemented in both MySQL and MariaDB. Generally, it's the same with the exception of the GraphML in MariaDB. You can't really screw around with SQL in terms of a fork. Data masking, also available in MySQL Enterprise 8.0. It's basically a method to hide your sensitive information by replacing the real values with substitutes. So credit card details could be masked with something else. If someone breaks in, they walk away with crap. However, if you don't want to pay, the poor man substitute is to actually use proxy SQL, which actually has data masking built in a proxy layer. Or MaxScale also has data masking, but MaxScale has licensing issues. It's got the BSL licensed. 8.0 has even more goodness. Because they've moved the data dictionary to InnoDB, you have got the ability to have atomic ACLs. And you can have dynamic privileges, so you can add, revoke, check global privileges as well. And the syntax is very similar to what you already used to. It's just via grant. Promise to talk a little bit about firewalls. MySQL actually does come with a firewall. However, again, you got to pay for it. So the permanent solution is proxy SQL or MaxScale. So you'll notice that I've talked a little bit about proxy SQL in the last couple of slides. If you don't know what that is, it's a proxy, sits as a man in the middle, can handle multiple backends. I highly recommend you go check out proxysql.com. It's GPL, open source, by DBAs, for DBAs, and so forth. So check that out. It's not security per se, it's generally quite good middleware. So I'd say a lot can be thought about authentication, authorization, encryption, firewalls, audits. I've only just given you a very quick touch on the surface of what's available. I highly recommend you use the new software. So that today is MySQL 8 or MariaDB 10.3 or Percona Server 8. Upgrade frequently. It's really not a bad thing because features keep on coming in every point release. So with that, I'm, well, 5 minutes over, but I hear that this is the last session, so I'm actually open to questions, possibly.
Thank you very much.
The slides are already with Netways, who organizes wonderful events, so thank you. So you can obviously refer to the slides slower.
Thank you very much. We still have time for questions, I think. Are there any questions?
Who's going to upgrade to 8.0 today? Question.
There's one question.
Do you know anything on the release date of Percona Cluster on 8.0?
Do I know anything about the release of Percona XDB Cluster 8.0? Yeah, great question. So an educated guess would be the last week of May when Percona is having a conference in Austin. It'll come with Galera 3. Now, an educated guess as to when MariaDB 10.4 will be released with Galera 4 would probably be the week before that. So think late, so May 25th, 24th, 25th. I expect MariaDB 10.4 will come out before Percona XDB Cluster 8.0. That, of course, will bring two variants of Galera available, 1.3, 1.4. One has obviously got more features for like, large transaction support and so forth. One doesn't. But yes, that would be my educated guess.
Okay, thanks.
So everything should be released in like less than 2 weeks, in theory. 10.4 is like in its second release candidate, and you could, I ran a bunch of these examples with 10.4 earlier anyway. But I only give you screenshots.
So further questions? Okay.
Okay.
No more questions? Thank you very much.